Empire.
Hello and welcome to the Last Man Standig podcast. I'm your host, Ben Standig, and I cover the Washington Commanders for The Athletic. It is Tuesday afternoon here in the DMV. Hope everyone is doing well despite that week one loss, which, the result itself, getting the L, not that surprising. Some aspects of why they took the L, though, a little bit so. And I want to get into a little bit of that, having gone back and watched some of the all 22 and just had some time to collect some thoughts since I did my podcast after the game. So we'll get to that here in a moment. In addition, we'll start looking ahead. My guest today, Dan Duggan, senior writer covering the Giants for The Athletic. I said this in our conversation, but as crazy as it is, this is a bit of a must-win game if you're a team that has hopes of anything this year, right? And I think it's more the case for the other team because they made moves this offseason in year 3 of this new regime with Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll. They made moves to be aggressive where Washington did not. Nonetheless, nobody wants to be 0-2, and we know that Washington's schedule is going to get difficult right after Sunday's game at Northwest Stadium. Yes, that sounds weird to say. So we'll get to that here in a moment. On the Last Man Standing podcast. Of course, you can find anywhere you do your podcasting, iTunes, Spotify, you know the drill. Appreciate everybody listening and subscribing there. In addition, you check my workout on The Athletic. And you can hit me up on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call that, at Ben Standig. All right, so let's talk about a couple things here right off the top. First of all, there's another kicker in town. Cade York out after one game. He missed both of his field goal attempts against Tampa Bay. And I think almost more notably, he sent a kickoff out of bounds right after Brian Robinson's 7-yard touchdown pulled Washington within 13-7 in the second quarter, giving the Buccaneers the ball at their 40 with 7:17 left in the first half. Tampa Bay then methodically went down the field. Washington didn't get the ball back until there were 16 seconds remaining. Tampa Bay tacked on a field goal to make it 16-7, and kind of really never looked back from there. And Cade York is out. Washington made that move officially today. I reported this on Monday that they are bringing in Austin Seibert, who was with the Jets this summer, and that means that Washington got a little bit of a closer look at him because of the joint practice and the preseason game. I'll get to Seibert in a moment. This has just been such a unwanted journey for Washington since they released Brandon McManus following allegations of harassment. That case is still in the legal system. I know there was a change, a dismissal of the initial case, but it is still in the court system. It's been refiled, etc. So McManus he's not coming back. And they've gone through a bunch of different guys. They traded for Cade York, a conditional 7th-round pick. That pick is not going to be conveyed, so Washington loses nothing. But now they've turned to Austin Seibert, who, ironically, like Cade York, was a former draft pick by the Browns. Seibert, in his career, he has been with the Browns, the Bengals, the Lions. Didn't officially. Well, I guess he did take one kick for the Jets last year. For his career, he is 45 of 56 on field goals, 80.4%, 56 of 62 on extra points. His touchback percentage for his career, 37.3, not particularly notable there. He's also 2 for 6 from 50 plus and 17 of 24 from 40 plus. So not a guy with a big leg, but he's also was 26 of 26 from 39 and in. And right now, consistency at all would be welcome. So I think for everybody's sake, let's see if let's kind of hope that Austin Seibert solidifies that, so we don't have to keep talking about the kicker every week. But it's look, they thought they had a solution in Brandon McManus. I know I've seen people ask me, hey, why did they get rid of Joey Sly, or why didn't they bring him back? Look, all these things have there's connections. I believe Adam Peters and McManus were together in Denver, and McManus has been a good kicker. Like, that wasn't the issue, but this off the field matter that Washington decided to move on from that. I understand it. So this is the bind they find themselves in. Hopefully, Siebert can at least give them consistency to a degree, uh, but we'll see. I'm assuming nothing at this point now that they've gone through 5 kickers essentially, have had 5 guys with the team in practice or in preseason or now in the regular season. So Austin Siebert, the new kicker for the Commanders. I will say that I had somebody with a different team say to me when they made the York trade that they were surprised Washington went that way and thought that Siebert would have been a better choice off the bat. They've made it now, so they move forward with that. Now, as far as I know at this point, there's no injuries of note. Dan Quinn will talk to us on Wednesday along with Jaden Daniels. And speaking of Jaden Daniels, so I've gone back and looked at the All 22, and I imagine some of you have either done the same or gone back and watched the game or just thought about it and all that good stuff. And, again, if you take the grand scheme of things, it was his first game. There were some positives for sure. We saw the running ability, the elusivity, the ability to make plays, and at times it was the only offense that Washington was generating. Of course, you want to see your quarterback throw the ball, and one of the big positives I've thought on Daniels from the moment that we started thinking about the draft way back when was how and talking to scouts and sources, etc., that he's not a thrower who he's not a runner who throws. He's a thrower that can run. I don't know that we saw that exactly play out in week 1. Going back and looking at some of the All 22, for me, it's sort of a 50-50 call as to whether he was running too quick and missing and not passing to open guys who were at least NFL open, or was there just not a lot of open receivers and he was having to tuck and run for that reason, as well as some pressure. The line wasn't bad, but Tampa Bay was missing some of their starters. Andrew Wiley gave up some pressures inside, etc. Dan Quinn spoke yesterday, meaning Monday, and here is what he had to say. I'll just sort of paraphrase a little bit. He said that look, if Jaden could go back, there'll probably be a few throws that he would either like to rip or where the progression may have taken him. In other words, staying with his eyes down the field, staying in the pocket, or even if you're moving out of the pocket, looking for receivers, that there may have been some more opportunities than he took advantage of. Again, he ran the ball 16 times. But Quinn went on, quote, "But by and large, I felt from the competitor side that was it," meaning he thought that Jaden delivered there. Those were some of the things I saw even on some of the runs. We didn't have a lot of designed quarterback runs. That's a notable point for anybody criticizing the staff for calling runs. He ran the ball 16 times. That's different than saying they called for 16 runs. Although, why are you having the rookie quarterback that you're concerned about run the ball twice from the goal line inside when the game is out of hand? I think that to me is a little questionable, but okay. Fantasy players are thrilled that he scored that touchdown if you started him. And then Quinn goes on to say, I think if he'd asked, it says the same thing. Basically, if he could, he'd want to let some go. There were some missed opportunities. I think the one to Terry to start the second half, stood out. But by and large, he really felt comfortable in those spaces. I have to remind myself, Dan Quinn can say some good stuff, but it doesn't always make for easy reading. I'll just leave it at that. But anyway, I think the assessment for Jaden Daniels, and I'm curious to hear what he has to say, is, how often were there plays that he could have made down the field, the type of plays that NFL quarterbacks have got to make that he just didn't. Now, when you look at some metrics that are available out there, there is a wonder, did he get the ball enough? Was he given enough opportunity to throw the ball? According to so this is from Next Gen Stats. They send some information out. They said, quote, "In Jaden Daniels' first NFL game, the Commanders appear to be focused on providing him with quick, short receiving options. Daniels had the lowest average time to throw of the week, 2.35 seconds, coupled with a 5.2 yards of intended air yards, which was fourth lowest, 1.6 average completed air yards, the lowest, and an 8.3 aggressiveness, a measure of where whether there is a defender within 1 yard or less of the receiver at the time of completion or incompletion. This was the fourth lowest in week one. Now, that latter point is the one that I'd wonder about, again, in terms of were the receivers open and Daniels didn't feel comfortable throwing to what was there, or was the receivers not getting enough separation, and therefore Daniels decided he couldn't get the ball in there. I think that's an interesting question. We know Washington lacks for playmakers per se beyond Terry McLaurin and the two running backs. It's hard to see exactly who's going to stand out for them. But at the same time, whether it's Cliff Kingsbury's schemes or just it's not like these guys are scrubs. Are they open? But does Daniels have to recognize what a window in the NFL looks like that you've got to be able to make, that maybe you could wait for something bigger to open up in college, where the talent gap between your stars and just other teams' players can be pretty seismic. So we'll see where that goes this week. Like I said, I'm a little torn on this. I do think there were some plays where Daniels could have, to use Dan Quinn's terms, let it rip, but he ultimately chose not to. And there were times where I was watching it going, boy, I don't see a lot of guys open, especially down the field. So that will be interesting to hear from Quinn and Daniels more about what was there on that tape. Cliff Kingsbury talks on Thursday. I think another thing, Dan Quinn, so he has talked about Tell the Truth Monday. This is where the team gets together. They started this in the preseason, where the team gets together and kind of what it says. The staff lays out, let's be honest, good, bad, whatever, about what transpired here. And he talked about certain aspect that he's going to, when he does this, he's going to talk about with the team: turnover margin, tackling margin, penalty margin, starting field position, and explosive plays from scrimmage. He's like, those are the 5 topics that really kind of round out both what their style is, their approach, but also, just sort of the way a game unfolds. To that end, I thought he made a very honest answer after the game, and that had to do with the team's energy. He said, and he said that, essentially, look, I think so. Basically, I asked him the question: you guys didn't practice a lot. Sorry, you didn't use each other a lot in the preseason game. The starters were at most played 3 series. Some guys didn't play at all. There's not a lot of hitting. Did some of that lead to what we saw? And he said it's a fair question, but I honestly thought the preparation was really good. Going into it, I was expecting us to hit our marks and go. I just didn't feel the energy, the hitting, and the tackling that I was accustomed to seeing. So that's the part to make sure that our identity is what we're looking for. If that comes to life, then everything else can connect. Look, I do think this is a huge deal for this team. It's a huge deal for any team, of course, obviously, to have that needed energy and aggressiveness to play football at this level. But I think for this team in particular, it is paramount if they want to have any kind of success this year, because they are going to be deficient at talent against a lot of opponents. And it's not just the offensive playmakers. It's not just the cornerbacks. I just think across the board, they've got some issues. I think one issue they have on offense that there's only so much, that there's really not much they can do about, is speed. Jimmy Johnson used to say back in the day with Dallas that speed kills, meaning you get speed out in the field and let the other team have to deal with that. Well, speed kills, but right now the lack of it, I think, is what is killing Washington's offense in particular, maybe even a little bit on defense as well, which is why the consistency, the aggressiveness, the energy has got to be there. And again, I'm not saying these guys weren't playing hard. I don't think that's what Dan Quinn was saying either, but where were those moments where you just felt that a player made a play almost like unexpected because of going harder at the ball, going harder at a one-on-one situation than the other team did? It didn't feel that was out there, and I think that is going to be huge for them this week against the Giants, a team that is should be in a desperation mode. Both teams again are facing 0-2, but for New York, I think the stakes are higher based on where they are in their rebuild and so on. This is again year 3 under Brian Daboll and Joe Shane. So I think those are some things that stood out to me about what happened in this last game and where Washington needs to go moving forward. I didn't mention the secondary or the defense a ton. Dan Quinn did talk about that. You need to see better communication in the secondary. I think that goes without saying. Too many broken plays. Baker Mayfield took advantage of plenty of them, and that really did Washington in Tampa 9 of 13 on third downs, and they scored on 7 of their 8 possessions. I think one thing that this isn't a well, I think one thing that stood out also was that John Allen and Daron Payne. This is like reminiscent of last year. They got 7 pressures, according to PFF, but 0 quarterback hits. I'm not just talking about sacks, just getting after the quarterback, getting a hand on him. They didn't get any, and that is going to be, again, if you're paying these guys to play, you're paying them a lot to make plays, and if they're not, the way this team is set up, then there's going to be really no shot for this defense to succeed. It all starts with those 2 guys up front, and if they can command double teams, if they're causing pockets to collapse, everything else around them works better. If it's not, then I think there's going to be more long days ahead. On the snaps, Luke McCaffrey finished just ahead of De'Ami Brown in snaps. I think it's interesting is that like, I'm not saying Luke McCaffrey wasn't playing in the preseason, or I should say in practice, but he was typically like not with the ones. And I don't know. It was one of those deals. I wonder sometimes if they were trying to hide things a little too much or not force the issue, and it led to him being not typically with the starters. I do think that Luke McCaffrey has the most potential of any receiver not named Terry McLaurin, but potential is also a bit of the unknown, right? I mean, we don't know what he is going to look like here for the long term, but he may very well be a part of the solution down the line. I don't know that he is right now, but they're, again, it wasn't like he played I think 1 more snap than De'Ami Brown, who had 0 targets, by the way, very odd. But, for them to have a more consistent and productive offense, they're going to need better, more interesting play out of the receiver room. And again, whether that's Jaden Daniels throwing the ball to them, even in tight spaces, and letting them make plays, or the receivers to find ways to get open, they're going to need a lot more. But McCaffrey did end up playing the second most snaps. So I think that's an interesting note there because of, 3rd-round pick, the bloodlines. He's only 2 years playing this position. He could have the most potential fairly easily. One other note on the snaps, Mike Davis, one of the cornerbacks they signed, or the cornerback, I guess I should say, that they signed this offseason, 0 defensive snaps. He did play some on special teams. They went with St. Juste and Forbes primarily on the outside, with Mikey Sanders still and Noah Igbenogany as the other 2 corners getting the work. I mentioned the speed, like free agent market, there's not going to be a ton out there. Any of the vets who are out there who are of note probably either want to play for a contender or want to get some legit money more than, say, the minimum. I don't think Washington is in the spot that they're not looking to pay guys. I mean, obviously, maybe on a 1-year deal, you can kind of get a little bit higher, but they haven't shown sort of that inkling. But if you look at practice squads, there are obviously a lot of guys around the league who are available. And I don't know that who Washington would look at, but between speed on offense and cornerbacks, I would have to think they've got to be looking pretty hard at that group. Mike Davis's contract, because he played in week 1 and he's a vested vet, is now guaranteed. So there's no real advantage to releasing him or anything. But if you're not going to play him and he's only going to help you on special teams, I don't know why I wouldn't be trying to figure out what other guys I might be able to add, simply because of the fact that he is a guy. Yeah, he's been around this league. He's, if it would be one thing if he was brought in and ends up playing a decent amount, and maybe that still happens. It's only week 1, but that's the type of move I don't quite get. Same thing I've talked about before with Trent Scott at tackle. I get that why they didn't spend on a frontline starter, but I would think you could do better than Mike Davis or Trent Scott, especially if they're not going to play. And in Davis's case, 0 defensive snaps in week 1. So that'll be something to watch. And of course, I do wonder if they're going to possibly make a move to grab somebody off somebody else's practice squad. It doesn't have to be this week. They should try to, kick as many tires as possible as they're rebuilding this thing. And I think those are 2 positions or 2 areas of need that I would certainly keep an eye on if I were them. All right, so let's get to the game here. Dan Duggan and I spoke a bit just a little bit ago. He is at D Duggan, two G's in there, 21 on Twitter or X. And Dan's been covering the Giants for a while. He has lived through those ups and downs, and they had, as bad as Washington's loss was in week one, the Giants was way worse, I think, at home against a Minnesota team going with Sam Darnold. And, again, the Giants had, whether it was false or, poor sense of self or not, there's expectations for the Giants this year, in part because of the moves that they made, getting Brian Burns and so on. They also lost Saquon Barkley. We talked about that, the hard knocks of it all, and more. So here we go. Dan Duggan and I talking Commanders Giants happening this Sunday at Northwest Stadium. All right, whether anybody wants it or not, the Commanders and Giants are going to meet for the first time this year, week 2 at Northwest Stadium. I don't know if you know, Dan, there's a new stadium name here. No longer FedEx Field. It's Northwest Stadium. How about that?
Exciting stuff. A lot of change down there, huh?
Yes, even that is changed. So, as I said, Dan Duggan is here with me. Giants. I don't know if you're technically the senior reporter there, but you're that guy for sure. Boy, so here we go. Week 2. I look. I can't call anything a must win in week 2. But if anybody's going to harbor hopes of having a successful season, they probably have to win this game, which is says a lot probably about where both of these teams are. And not to go like too negative at the start, but I look, Washington's obviously disappointed with the way they lost, but I kind of feel like the Giants, Washington to me is not really trying to win this year, but I don't mean they're tanking, but they didn't build their roster to compete as high as the playoffs this year. Next year, that's their plan. Giants went out and got Brian Burns. There's obviously been a lot of talk. The Hard Knocks revealed a lot. I got to feel like the Giants have been feeling even worse after this week 1 than probably the Commanders are.
Yeah, I mean, listen, if you don't want to go negative, this will be a very short conversation because I know, we've been around long enough to know that the worst thing you do is overreact to week 1. I mean, the sky is falling right now in the Giants world. I mean, it is. I had low expectations for the team coming into the season. I did not expect it to be that bad because you go back to last year where they got the doors blown off in the opener. That was kind of like a Murphy's Law game against a Super Bowl contender in the Cowboys. It was rainy. There was a lot of factors say, guys were getting hurt. Oh man, that one just got away from us. You can move on. This one, it was like a pretty mediocre to bad Vikings team. Conditions were perfect. They were healthy. There were no excuses, and they just got totally outclassed. And Daniel Jones looked like a broken quarterback. I mean, that's where the 5-alarm blaze is here. I mean, there's plenty of other problems, and that's the thing. If it was just Jones, you could say, okay, like at least they have this, at least they have that. That's why I said there wouldn't be a lot of positives here if you want to go that route. But starting with Jones, I mean, listen, that's where everything begins. And, he's had an up and down career for sure. I certainly would say more down, but I don't think he's ever looked as bad as he did in that Vikings game. And it kind of felt like that David Carr syndrome where he just felt like a guy who's been battered so much. He's coming off the ACL. He had 2 neck injuries. Like he just looks like a quarterback that was totally rattled. Now, if you're the Giants, I don't even know if you're rooting for this, but maybe you can say it was just one game. He had the long layoff coming back from the ACL. But it was alarming, how bad he looked, just missing receivers. Like there's certain parts of his game that weren't even usually weaknesses that showed up on Sunday where again, like, we all know his limitations, but like if a guy's running a crossing route, he usually isn't, throwing something in the dirt at the guy's ankles. And we were seeing that on Sunday. So that's where it's just like, wow, it's way worse than even the biggest pessimist could have expected because it was basically just non-functional on offense on Sunday.
How much did he play, or how much did the starters play in the preseason? Because here they only played at most 3 series, like Jaden Daniels, but some guys on defense, John Allen, Payne, Bobby Wagner, they didn't play at all. And I do think that has some factor in what happened for Washington in week 1. How much did Jones and the starters play?
Well, so it's funny because like I mentioned that Dallas start, and I mean the whole season got off to a terrible start last year. So obviously, what does every coach do? They change things the next year. So Dable ran kind of a country club camp in 2023 where veterans were getting a lot of days off. It was super light. They played like 1 series. It was funny because they played the Panthers backups, but Daniel Jones was right down the field, like bang, bang, bang. Darren Waller, you're like, oh my gosh, this offense is clicking. And that was it. That's all you saw all preseason. So everyone went into this regular season with a great feeling. and then just got punched in the mouth in that opener. So this year, it was a much more intense camp. Even in practice, forget it, the preseason games, they were going 11 on 11 exclusively, no 7-on-7 drills at all.
Wow.
Because I think Dable wanted the O line to get the work. He also wanted Jones to get used to being back in a pocket, and because Daniel Jones is a great 7-on-7 quarterback. So obviously, I think they realized we need to expose him to the pressures of the pocket, even if he can't get hit. So they had joint practices with the Lions for the first preseason game. Those were super intense. I'm sure you probably saw the clips of the fights and Daniel Jones even be involved. But didn't play him in that game, which I think that's kind of standard. The next week they didn't have a joint practice with the Texans, so the starters played the whole first half, and that again would be memorable. I mean, I know you aren't probably paying attention to other teams' preseason games, but that Daniel Jones pick six was like a meme in that game. So obviously that was a rough showing there. And then the following week, I think everyone treats that third preseason game like sort of the old fourth preseason game. They had one joint practice with the Jets, so they didn't play. So basically a half, which isn't a significant uptick from last year. But I think overall, the camp approach was a little more intense. Changed everything except for the result when the Bulls started flying in the opener. So I don't know what if Dable's back for year 4. I don't know what the answer would be next year because changing everything hasn't had the desired effect to date.
Yeah, for sure. And obviously with the Daniel Jones, it's so funny because down here we have a very different perception of Daniel Jones because it seems like his career, he comes in to face Washington and has his best games of the year. So even like I saw some stat yesterday was like since he signed his contract, I think he has thrown more pick sixes than he has touchdown passes to his own teammates or
Hard to
something.
believe.
So, so I quote tweeted that and said, "Yeah, sure, but next week he's going to come here and throw for 3 touchdowns and run one in." So that's what I think we're all expecting. But that said, I imagine part of the conversation is it's not that just Daniel Jones is not playing well, but they chose him to give a contract to rather than Saquon Barkley. That became obviously a storyline. We saw it play out. I thought that conversation at Hard Knocks was fascinating between Joe Shane and Saquon that they put it on. He goes to Philly and 3 touchdowns in the first game. I'm sure that will be his season high, but what a dynamic there. How much does that, even though it's not relevant to what's happening with the Giants right now, how much was that like just pouring gasoline on that fire?
I mean, I think that's a good way to put it. It did pour gasoline on it because if Saquon goes out and rushes for 40 yards and the Eagles look terrible and he doesn't score any touchdowns, it doesn't make you feel better about Sunday's performance. But the fact that he went out and scored 3 touchdowns, they scored 30 some odd points, beat a good team, does definitely make it worse. And you mentioned Hard Knocks, like I think we all knew the sentiment in the building that Saquon was a John Mara favorite. He doesn't like to let guys like that walk. So you might have heard from sources or just using your own kind of intuition, being like he probably wasn't super on board with this. Whereas Joe Shane very clearly, doesn't value paying running backs, wanted to move on. But then we actually get to see it, like with our own eyes, with our own ears, hear John Mara, sitting on the shelf basically in Joe Shane's office saying, "Man, I'm not going to sleep well if he goes to Philly." Like it was literally your boss explaining his worst case scenario, and that nightmare came true. And then standalone national TV game on Friday night, you got to see it play out. This is exactly why John Mara did not want Saquon Barkley, going down 995 to your hated rival. So yeah, I mean that only compounded things because again, if Saquon has 3 touchdowns and then the Giants go out and score 35 points and Malik Neighbors has 5 touchdowns, you say, okay, hey, we moved on. But just putting them together is what makes it that much, just kind of uglier. And I'm sure Joe Shane, when he walked into the office on Monday, wasn't going to be skipping in there anyways. But like, if he saw John Mara in the cafeteria Monday morning, he might have said, "You know what? I'm gonna just go, go up to my office and have someone send something up." Because I don't know if you want to have that interaction. Because again, we know for a fact because of Hard Knocks that they were opposed on how to handle Saquon. So how that plays out this season, they can't pretend like, oh, we're on lockstep on that. They weren't. And if your boss is right on what his gut told him to do there, that is going to be a hard thing for Joe Shane to overcome.
Yeah, and we'll talk about the game in a second. But in terms of that, like you said, it'd be one thing if it's like, okay, if they let Saquon go, you may hear from sources or some sense of what happened, but you may never know the truth. But now that you saw it, and in the agent survey that I just did, one of the questions was, what did the agents, since they're on the other side of this, what did they think of it? And some of them thought it was interesting, but a lot of them thought it was a bad look for the Giants. They were silly to have done it, and it was kind of embarrassing. Do you think that since you're saying that it's already to be people are already 5-alarm fire there, and if they were to lose to Washington, that having all that come out publicly could lead to the owners making changes even before the end of the year? I'm not saying maybe after week 2, but could that actually lead to them making quicker changes because it was so public?
Yeah, I mean, first I'll go to Hard Knocks. Good luck, NFL Films, finding a team to do season 2, the off season. Nobody's going any part of
Oh,
that. It's funny.
and it was so
John
good.
Mara, it was great. It was the best one, I thought.
Yeah.
But so John Mara, in his infinite wisdom, I mean, he's really pressed a lot of the wrong buttons here since he's kind of been running the show. His theory was he did not want to be on, the training camp, the traditional Hard Knocks. He felt it was too intrusive. They've been able to avoid it. They've also been kind of exempt because of been changing coaches over so much, and you can't be on it the first year with the new coach. Blah blah blah. But I think he knew eventually they were going to be on it. So somehow he pitched doing this version of it, which to me was such a miscalculation. Now, when it first got announced, I was like, oh, this is going to be, just some PR fluff. I can't believe what they showed us. I'm thankful for it as a viewer and obviously as a reporter around the team. You got insight that you'd never get otherwise. But man, if you did the preseason Hard Knocks, we'd be getting 15-minute segments on the undrafted rookies' quest to make the team. You'd get 30 minutes on a meaningless preseason game. Instead, we're getting like the down and dirty conversations between high-ranking officials. So, I mean, to me, like, wow, I'm so thankful they did it. Like I said, I don't think anyone else will ever do it again. Unless Goodell, forces them to. But so to your point about like, will it impact things like in season? I don't know. I mean, like, I don't think there's any real benefit to firing a general manager in season. I mean, they did it a few years back with Jerry Reese, and that was strictly like an emotional reaction. They were pissed off about the way that Eli Manning benching got handled. But like, the GM can't really affect much in November when the trade deadline is passed.
Right.
So again, that was just strictly an emotional reaction. I don't see any way they would do that with Joe Shane. Brian Dable, I kind of feel the same way. Like, I mean, guy won Coach of the Year 2 years ago. Now, last year was pretty much a disaster. This year's off to a disaster start. I don't know how much they would gain by firing him, if things go off the rails. I mean, because I think the one thing that works maybe in their favor is not the right way to put it, but we talk about how John Mara wasn't on board with letting Saquon Barkley walk necessarily. He was very much on board with re-signing Daniel Jones. So if the reason why the team stinks is because Daniel Jones stinks, it's a little harder for John Mara to go like, oh, you guys are out of here. Like, well, you wanted this too, John. So, I mean, listen, if they have another terrible year, I mean, heads very, very well could roll after the season. I think in the season, that would just be kind of an emotional reaction. I don't think it would really accomplish anything. So I think that, they're at least safe through the season. I mean, obviously we're 1 week in, a lot can change. We've seen that many times here. But yeah, I would think they're safe. And then, obviously you kind of see how the rest of the season plays out, and that's subject to change. Or, hey, this could have been an aberration, and we're talking about how they're going to be here for the next 10 years. Who knows?
Well, to that point, though, on today's Tuesday, on Monday, you tweeted out that Brian Dable said Daniel Jones is still our starter. So the fact that the question even had to come up, maybe you're right. Maybe you can't. It doesn't make sense to fire the higher ups, but maybe you could bench Daniel Jones. And obviously Drew Lock is not some great stuff, but he's played the league. Some people still think he has promise, what have you. Do you think there's any chance that a slow start, even say Sunday against Washington, could lead to a benching, or is that even still way premature? They need to see a lot more from Jones before making a change.
No, now that I think is on the table when you talk about sort of what kind of changes that could happen. Because again, we do know this regime gave him the contract. We also saw on Hard Knocks how much they were willing to try to move up to get a quarterback to replace him. So clearly they are not full steam ahead. Again, that's why Hard Knocks was great. We had heard this, we knew they're trying to trade up, but they could deny it and leak stuff out. We saw it, with our own eyes and heard with our own ears, like I said earlier. So we know that they're not married to Daniel Jones long term. They gave him that 4-year deal. There was a very intentional output in after this season, but it's been so bad that if it doesn't turn around fast, I absolutely think benching's on the table. Like, again, we're talking about a guy who signed that contract. He has started 7 games. He has finished 5 because, again, he missed a lot of time last year with injury. He's finished 5 games and signed that contract. After the first game of year 2 of this contract, people are asking on Sunday post game and then Monday, like the post-mortem, is he still your starting quarterback? And a lot of times fans will say, that's a crazy question. When you clickbait journalists, it's a totally legitimate question. That tells you just how dire things have been and how bad he has looked. So, and it's going back to your point you mentioned earlier about how Daniel Jones has kind of owned Washington, probably the one and only team that he's had kind of sustained success against. So in some ways, this is shaping up well for him. Like, if there's any team he wants to see on Sunday, it's those uniforms. Same time, different DC, who he did not, obviously head coach and Dan Quinn's status now, but when he was in Dallas, certainly had plenty of success against Daniel Jones. Different personnel, understood. But so it's not as if he's just facing the same team. He's tormented these years because there are some changes there. However, they just gave up 37 points Baker Mayfield 4 touchdowns. If he goes in there and lays another egg, I think it's a very high probability there's a change in week 3. And that might sound crazy. I'm old enough to remember when Eli Manning got benched after an 0-2 start in 2019 to pave the way for Daniel Jones. It was kind of a circle of life moment. Now, Drew Lock wouldn't inspire the same hope because Daniel Jones at the time was a number 6 pick and a rookie. But yeah, it just looks so bad that if it doesn't turn around against Washington again, it's a soft a landing spot as he could find. So if he doesn't play well there, I would not be surprised at all if there's a change, this time next week.
That's amazing. This is the thing about having the rookie quarterback. And I'm obviously Jane Daniels at number 2. A lot of potential, a lot of hope, and this is hardly a 1-year experiment. But regardless of almost what happens, there is hope. And obviously with Daniel Jones, that aspect is gone. A lot of people already, it doesn't even matter what happens. A lot of people are ready to move on. And it's the luxury that Washington has that they were able to reset the clock, not just with him, but all the changes that they made. So people are not thrilled with what happened Sunday, but most reasonable people understand, okay, this is a process. It's going to take a minute. You mentioned that Jones didn't have a lot of success against Dallas. I think Dallas was 6-0 in Quinn's 3 years there against the Giants, something like that. I thought I read.
Yeah,
Whatever.
no, for sure. I can't remember the last time they beat the Cowboys. I think it was like maybe when Joe Judge was here, the Cowboys had a sort of a down year when maybe Dak was hurt or something. It's been a while. Put it that way. It's been a while.
Yeah. So I guess like you said, it's different personnel. Obviously, Dallas has a better roster talent-wise than where Washington is, Micah Parsons alone, etc. But what are some of the things that you thought that Dallas maybe with Quinn did well against Jones? And then I guess to that end, for Jones and the Giants offense to have a good day, what do you think needs to happen?
Yeah, I mean, obviously they pressured him, and again, that's where there are just some personnel deficiencies there, where you don't have a Micah Parsons in Washington, and he just wrecked some of those games. Obviously really good corners. He got hurt in one of those games. Like he had some disastrous games against Dallas. I mean, I think again that a lot of that was just strictly a talent thing where the Dallas pass rush was just so much better than what the Giants had protecting Jones. So there was a game where Jones, like, he didn't even play that bad. He got sacked like 8 times, or he's just running for his life in one of those games against Dallas, where it's just so like I don't think Washington can replicate that. I know they have a good front, but definitely not at the same level in terms of like a Micah Parsons who just dominated some of those games. But so what do the Giants need to do well? Uh, it's like funny. I have to like take a breath to figure out what that is. It has to be Malik Neighbors and the wide receivers making plays, because again that's where Washington is vulnerable. I wouldn't think that the Giants are going to come out and be able to just like run the ball down Washington's throat. Now, again, I don't watch the Bucks game, but just kind of looking at the box score and
Sure.
what I know of it, seems like the secondary that was pretty questionable coming into the year remains pretty questionable. The Giants certainly didn't get their passing game going against the Vikings, but if there's any hope, it's Malik Neighbors. Has looked like a stud from day one he got here. I mean, even in a quiet game in the opener, he had like 4 catches for 65 yards or something like that. I want to say. So I mean, he's going to be a productive player, but he's a guy who you would hope could like be a game breaker, and he couldn't do it against Minnesota. But maybe against a weaker defense, he can do that. Because again, if you're talking about like the Giants' path to victory, I think it just has to be big pass plays. They have speed and Neighbors and Darius Slayton, Jalen Hyatt. Like that's kind of, if they're going to have a successful offense, it's going to be based on that. So then the question just becomes, can the quarterback facilitate it? And obviously that's the big question that's moving over everything here.
Yeah, no, for sure. Tampa Bay was just methodical, whether it was out passes to Mike Evans and Chris Godwin in the slot, or just Baker Mayfield. They converted 9 of 13 third downs. They were doing that, but yeah, there were a lot of broken plays in the secondary. Dan Quinn talked about the poor miscommunication in the back that he needs to see more of. So yeah, if Neighbors is able to get streak down the field, he could very well take advantage if they still have some of those problems. There's an NFC East roundtable. I think it's going up on Thursday. Encourage people to read it. You didn't participate. Your partner, Charlotte Carroll, did. But one of the questions was, what is something in the game from week 1 that you saw that maybe concerned you more than it did before the season started? I don't know if this is your answer, but you mentioned, or maybe we talked before we started about the Giants' defensive line not doing a ton against the Vikings, despite having Brian Burns, Kayvon Thibodeau, Dexter Lawrence, and others. I don't know if that's your answer, but do you think were you surprised, I guess, just how limited they were, or was this maybe something that's more concerning going forward here?
Yeah, I mean, just to provide some variety, I won't answer Daniel Jones. But no, that was because again, like I said, if you felt like everything else was clicking and it was just the poor quarterback play, you could write it off. All right, well, like we got to suck it up with this guy or we make a change. But no, there was really not a lot to feel great about. And the point you brought up there about the pass rush, yeah, I think we were talking before we started, but I'll revisit it here. If this you asked how's the Giants offense, like what would success be? Like how are they going to get there? And I explained that. How is this defense going to be good this year? It has to be the pass rush. Like because you talk about a young secondary in Washington, the Giants is probably younger. I mean, they have Deontay Banks, who's a second year guy at one spot, first round pick, like Forbes.
Yep.
They have Cordell Flott, who's a third round pick, who has never really been like a full time starter. He's probably gonna be the other outside spot next week or on Sunday. You got Tyler Nubin, a second round rookie at safety. You got Drew Phillips, a third round rookie at slot. You got Jason Pinnock, who's like a third or fourth year player, but really only a second year as a starter at the other safety spot. So I mean, that's youth, obviously, right there. How are you gonna, kind of mask that youth or help that youth? It has to be the defensive tackle you're paying $22.5 million to, the edge rusher you're paying $28.2 million to, and the edge rusher you picked number 5 overall 3 years ago. Now, Dexter Lawrence, you can set your clock. He's going to be in the backfield a lot on Sunday. He's in the backfield a lot every game. He's the one guy I think you could say he showed up against Minnesota and he had a sack. He had hit Sam Darnold's arm to force an interception. Had like 7 pressures. I mean, to do that from the nose tackle is obviously tremendous. And again, he just shows up week in and week out. The edge rushers, they didn't show up really much at all. Now, Minnesota has, good tackles. Christian Darrisaw is really good. With O'Neal, I think is the right tackle. He is, it's probably one of the best tackle duos in the league. Minnesota's got a great scheme, a lot of play action. So like, you hear the same excuses from every edge rusher. Oh, well, they didn't give me many opportunities, and obviously the Vikings had the lead, so you couldn't really pin your ears back. But still, there's snaps there where you're getting paid this much money, or you were a premium draft pick. You need to make your presence felt, and these guys did not. Now, I don't think that's going to be the case all season with Brian Burns. Like, I mean, you can question how much they gave up to get, to trade for him, early second round pick and the contract, but he's a good player. Like, he's going to be a good player.
Right.
Kayvon Thibodeau's the guy where it's like he had the stats last year, but he wasn't like a good player down in and down out. You look at all those advanced metrics, and he was like down near the bottom, like pass rush win rate, stuff like that. So he's a guy where I think the jury is still very much out. And I mean, really, I'd say the best game of his career might have been that one in Washington his rookie year, where right off the bat he had the strip sack, recovered a fumble. Like that was one of his more dominant games. He has not been that guy consistently at all, and was like just invisible in the opener. So you look at, again, I told you Minnesota has good tackles. The interior line's a little shaky. You look at Washington, that's a spot you would think that this pass rush should exploit. I mean, it's obviously not a great offensive line, and as I mentioned, you have so much invested in this pass rush. They better be able to get after him, a rookie quarterback, against a kind of suspect offensive line. Because if they don't, I mean, then you're gonna have even bigger questions than we already do right now.
Yeah, and it's possible like Washington may end up going with Brandon Coleman, their third round pick at left tackle. He was trending in that direction to be the starter. I don't even know if it was like that he was all that, but like the other options weren't great. But then he missed all of preseason with a shoulder injury, played some last week. So if he's out there, that Washington fans will be happy. But a rookie in your first start against guys who are pretty talented could be a problem. And then right tackle Andrew Wiley was, shaky last year, and he had some tough spots giving up inside pressure that led to some of those Jaden Daniels runs, or getting out of the pocket maybe a little too quick at times, for sure. So I don't know. It's probably like almost silly to say what's it going to take, or what do you think is going to happen, or what do you think it's going to take for your side to win. But I guess just to that end, is it just play better, or is there like a specific thing?
Yeah, I mean, listen, you are going against a team that's, I think, what was it? Mike Sando, our colleague, did that poll of, like where teams going to rank in the NFC. I'm pretty sure the Giants were 15, where the Commanders 14 or 13.
Something
They had to
like
be
that.
pretty far down. Yeah,
those two in Carolina are somewhere in the bottom 3.
Yeah, Carolina was definitely 16. They look like they might hit that one on the head. But I mean, listen, I think Minnesota was about 12 or 13. So it wasn't like they played some heavyweight last week. But I mean, if the Giants, listen, they have to at least be competitive against Washington. If they're not competitive, like then the firing talks you were saying, you might even get louder. But yeah, I mean, they should not get blown out, by this Commanders team. You're talking about a rookie quarterback making his second start. Certainly not an overwhelming amount of talent on the offense. The defense, I think, the front seems pretty solid, and you always got those guys in the middle, I know. But again, the secondary, questionable. So I mean, this is, I think you might use the term early, must win. I mean, it is a must win. It's week 2. I don't care. Like, it doesn't mean must win that's going to send them on the path to the playoffs. The Giants just need to, like, calm down the noise here a little bit, especially because they got a murderer's row coming up after Washington. It's like they got
Right.
Cleveland, they got Dallas on a short week. They got a bunch of playoff teams, Seattle, all these teams like waiting in the wings. So, man, if they lose this one, like, it is going to get ugly around here. So, I probably picked the Giants to win, not with very much confidence or conviction, but just because I almost can't imagine what will happen if they lose. So just my own sanity, I'll think they're going to win and then deal with the repercussions if they don't.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I mean, I would say again, this is the difference when you draft a rookie quarterback and you have a new staff and you don't. Well, obviously, fans want the Washington to win, but if they lose, it is what it is. Except that similar, they have a murderer's row coming up at the Bengals, at Arizona, the Browns, the Ravens come up right after that. So it's going to be tough if they lose, but I think they can get it done. But I make no guarantees at this point. I need to see. I need to see a lot more. All right, go follow Dan on Twitter at DUGGAN21. Go read him on our Giants page. Does a great job covering this team, and there's definitely a lot to cover. By the way, I feel for everybody who has to cover a tough team, but as somebody who's covered a dumpster fire here for a few years, it's funny to watch other people have to deal with like different things. Like, oh boy, I remember those days. Not fun. So hopefully for your sake, just for your sake, that they win, so thus that they you don't have to deal with just straight chaos going forward.
Well, I mean, we're both quite experienced dealing with that, though. So it's not, it wouldn't be our first rodeo if it does go that way for our teams. Like you said, at least you guys have the promise of hope there. Even if the team's really bad, you can still say, all right, year 1, you kind of get a pass. The Giants are in year 3 of this regime and really no answer in sight at quarterback. So a little tougher to conjure up hope at this point. So again, if it goes totally off the rails in week 2, that might be a record as many dysfunctional seasons as I've covered. So yeah, again, maybe I'm just trying to put in the universe just for my own sanity to give us a week of, all right, they're 1-1, 0-2 going against that Cleveland defense. It could get really, really scary and ugly fast.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, man. Dan, I appreciate it. I'll see you Sunday in the press box, and we'll see what happens. Like I said, we're all assuming Daniel Jones will just come in and be Phil Simms or something, but we'll see. Thanks, man.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, Bram Weinstein here, play-by-play voice of the Commanders and founder of Empire Media, and we are so excited that Ben Standig has come along and joined us with Empire with his awesome podcast, Last Man Standig. I wanted to tell you about our 2 other primary shows, and selfishly, mine, the Bram Weinstein Show, which can be heard on ESPN 630 in DC from 11 to 12, but then becomes a podcast that goes up immediately at 12 o'clock, 5 days a week. Some of the best Commanders and DC sports coverage you're going to get. So if you love Ben's show, check out mine as well. And also don't forget to check out the John Keim Report from Empire Media as well, the ESPN Insider. We are bringing you the best Commanders coverage all season long. Be sure to subscribe to all 3 of our Empire shows, Last Man Standing, The Bram Weinstein Show, and The John Keim Report.
All right. Big thanks to Dan for his time. Thanks to everyone here for checking out the podcast. Back with more this week. Dan Quinn, Jaden Daniels speak on Wednesday. I will be tweeting about that if nothing else. There's an NFC East roundtable, as I mentioned, coming up on Thursday, and more to come here as well. But that is it for now. Ben Standig signing off. Until next time.